So Bill Gates is considering a bid to construct Britain's first mini nuclear reactor as a direct challenge to Rolls-Royce, which is vying for a government contract. The Microsoft billionaire's Seattle-based TerraPower said it was considering bidding for lucrative contracts to construct the United Kingdom's upcoming tiny modular reactors, or mini nukes, using agreements with Japan, South Korea, and the Luxembourg-based ArcelorMittal Steel Group. Mr. Gates claimed in a blog post that the nuclear energy company's work has drawn interest from around the globe. The U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen has warned of a constitutional crisis that risks economic and financial catastrophe if Congress does not raise a federal debt limit, with the government in danger of running out of cash in the absence of new borrowing capacity. The White House and Republican lawmakers are in a stalemate over lifting the debt ceiling, which Yellen has said could be breached as early as June the 1st. Her comments came 2 days before U.S. President Joe Biden was scheduled to meet congressional leaders in new talks on the fiscal impasse. For more on these headlines, we are joined now by Efosa Aluyi. He's the head of investments at Sankore Global Markets in our Lagos studios. Bright and early Monday morning. Thanks very much for coming through. Let's start with Janet Yellen, the Treasury Secretary. Is she being alarmist or factual when she talks about the consequences of not sorting out the U.S. debt ceiling? Good morning.
Morning, boss, and thank you for having me. I don't think she's been alarmist. I think, she's been factual. We've been here before, in 2011, where, Congress essentially passed a new debt ceiling with just days to spare. And recall that at that time, Janet Yellen was the, Fed vice chairperson. So she had a front seat, into all that situation and all that crisis that unfolded at the time. I mean, just for a bit of context, I mean, the U.S. government essentially is spending much more than it's getting from tax revenue, so it has to essentially borrow the balance of that. What the Congress has done is to create a ceiling for that borrowing, but obviously every now and then that ceiling has to be raised. The ceiling was last raised and pegged at 31 trillion. According to the Treasury Department and Janet Yellen, that ceiling they would go beyond that ceiling sometime in June or maybe sometime in the summer. So really it is to be sort of proactive to try and increase that ceiling again to ensure that the government continues to run. For context, in 2011, when we had this type of situation, the Congress did pass or increase that debt ceiling with days to spare. However, the aftermath of that was the United States losing its, AAA rating at the time. Unfortunately, this time around, you have a House that is controlled by the Republicans. What we've seen so far is akin to some sort of political brinkmanship, where Republicans are trying to drive home some points and are trying to take away funding for certain key areas like climate and social investments that Democrats certainly want to push. So a lot of politicking and certainly horse trading going on. But I would want to believe that the people in Congress are well aware of the implications of not raising this ceiling and a default by the United States, particularly at this time where, China is mounting a very vigorous challenge to the dominance of the U.S. dollar. It is important that, confidence in the dollar and in the U.S. economy is constantly reaffirmed, to ensure that there are no issues. I mean, the impact of, this ceiling not raised at this time or a potential default could be quite catastrophic on financial markets. So I don't think that she's been alarmist. She's been realistic. She's trying to, get in front of the situation and have Congress do the needful.
I get it. She's saying the monetary side, she's now on the fiscal side, so she understands, see the both kind side of the coin. But how do you think the debt ceiling showdown will play out between the White House and these recalcitrant, if you want to put them, Republicans?
Well, like I said, it's going to be a lot of horse trading, right? The Republicans see this as an opportunity to drive home some of their own points, get funding for some of the things that they want, and also probably reduce funding for some of the areas that they think are unnecessary, particularly areas that, the Democrats have continued to push. Like I said earlier, they control the House, so they've got some leverage right now. So it's going to be a lot of politicking. It's going to be a lot of horse trading. But I think that ultimately the ceiling will be increased. That ceiling will certainly be increased. But I think that the way and manner that it is done leading up to that would matter very crucially, would certainly have an impact on financial markets. I mean, financial markets that essentially focused on all of the, regional banking crisis that we've had for the month of March going into April. It's been, a lot about the Fed over the last week plus, but I think attention will begin to shift to this debt ceiling issue, and it will certainly have, significant impact on markets. But like I said earlier, I think that, the congressmen know better than to allow this, just go on for much longer than is necessary.
Okay, great. Let's switch to the UK. What do you make of this possible meeting between Business's Secretary Kemi Badenoch and Tech Chief Revolt? What's at play here?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is some sort of damage control, if you will, by the Business Secretary. I mean, this is the most valuable fintech in the UK, the most valuable startup in the EU. The CEO essentially didn't have very nice words, for business in the UK and for the UK in general over the weekend. And it is important that, policymakers step in front of this and try to sort of take charge and, repair, whatever has been damaged. But I think at the core of it is the fact that there are complaints around, how difficult it's become to, conduct and do business in the UK. Obviously, they are being courted by governments elsewhere. You're looking at Brussels, you're looking at, Frankfurt, you're looking at Paris. These are other, business headquarters in Europe that are also courting, these sort of businesses. But I think that, this is a meeting to try and, maybe stem the tide of, this sort of movement in the UK, where you recently had a lot of businesses opting to, for instance, list in the US than, the UK, opting to cite some of their global headquarters elsewhere, citing extreme bureaucracy in the UK. So I think, however, there's not been any confirmation yet whether, the meeting will be taken by them. But, I think it is the right move to try and, get in front of this by policymakers and ensure that, things get better really with investments in the UK from here on out.
Interesting. Why do you think then, if you talk about the delays in financial conduct or FCA's authorities granting a banking license to Revolt, why do you think the UK authorities have been a little bit reluctant to do that? What's the snag?
Well, I think that, all of the, regional banking turmoil that we've seen in the US could certainly be a factor, right? Recall that these are, financial technology institutions that are essentially looking to get a banking license to then take on deposits like what you've got, Starling and then Monzo also doing in the UK. I think this, recent turmoil is probably a factor. But of course, you can't take away the typical red tape that comes with these, sort of approval processes, But I think that, with this sort of public mention that this is getting, I'm sure policymakers would, put their house in order to ensure that these things are done quicker, the way that they should.
How would you describe the UK business environment at this time, post-Brexit and all of that? Does anything need to change dramatically to make UK still competitive compared to its former partners in the EU who are looking to take any of its lunch if they don't watch over it?
Well, I think that the UK kind of, had a really strong trajectory pre the global financial crisis. But I think after that, it's basically struggled to recover. Total factor productivity, really, which essentially speaks to innovation in the UK, has been on the downward trajectory for quite some time now. And also, the whole Brexit did not quite help. So you have a market that is sort of essentially, if you will, isolated from the rest of Europe in certain ways. So investments in research and development, investments in innovation has been on the downward trajectory in the UK. You've seen much more investments in, other European countries. You've seen much more investments in the US, for instance, and you're seeing a lot more companies in that tech space is, tilting more towards the US as well. Of course, the whole bureaucracy doesn't exactly help. You also look at the fact that, in terms of setting up business in the UK, it's quite expensive. House prices in the UK is quite high, particularly in London. Office spaces are, prices are through the roof. So if you put that, you put, the red tape, you put the fact that, total factor productivity in innovation has, dropped quite significantly. You look at the fact that Brexit hasn't quite helped the competitive standing of the UK as an investment destination, particularly if you compare to the EU and the US, has continued to dwindle. So there's a lot that needs to be done, particularly on the policy front, to arrest this tide and ensure that the UK slowly regains its place of pride.
All right, thank you so much, Aluyi. It's great having you here bright and early this Monday. Thank you so much. Do have a profitable day.